It is time to get uplifted. I'm Allison Seymour. So as adults, we are often forced to have really tough conversations, either with a boss, a colleague, spouse, and our children. And we know the lead up before that conversation, it can be an emotional roller coaster at times. But there are methods that you can use to prevent possible misunderstandings and hard feelings. Also limit your stress levels as a parent and encourage honest two-way conversations. So that is why during this episode of Get Uplifted, DC therapist Meredith Gardner, who is the owner and clinical director of District Therapy Associates, is here with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Truly appreciate you. And mental health and trauma expert Dr. Donald Grant, also the executive director of Mindful Training Solutions. Dr. Grant, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Both here to have really an important conversation. The theme of our show, Get Uplifted, it's all about good news, it's about positive vibes, but sometimes to get to that, we need to have these conversations, and sometimes they can be difficult conversations on difficult topics. So we're so happy that you're here. We're going to have a really great conversation today as far as parenting goes. So Dr. Gardner, Dr. Grant, let me start with you. These conversations can be hard.
Yeah.
As parents, we are trying to do everything that we can do to have a happy home life, but sometimes we need to have these discussions. It feels like during these times, they're getting harder to have. What are you seeing?
They are getting harder to have, and thank you so much for having this conversation with your viewers, because when you talk about your kind of theme of Get Uplifted, parents are really thirsty to have these tools, because the news cycle is really, really traumatizing for a lot of families. Yes. And parents are in many ways kind of locked, and they don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, and they themselves are dysregulated. And so when we talk about giving tools and giving tips and giving hints, we know that right now 1 in 5 children in the United States suffers from a mental health disorder every year. And so when we're saying the system is impacted by so many traumatic stories, so much vitriol across all the things that we see, we really need to help parents get a handle on this and help them learn, how do you keep your kids safe? How do you have these conversations? Because I've met so many parents who want to have the conversation, but they're afraid to dive into it just because they think it's going to make everything worse. And so hopefully today we'll be able to provide some tools to reduce that fear and give the parents the good news that you can talk to your children. But we also going to have to work with parents, because they have to know they have to do some of their own work too before going into those conversations.
And Meredith, you deal a lot with adolescents, young adults. What are you seeing as far as when you have people come into your practice? I know there is a whole spectrum of different sort of mental health challenges or mental health that we're dealing with, but overall, as far as that anxiety level, what are you seeing these days?
Yeah, so I work with children, adolescents. My practice works with everyone, and I think as Donald was saying, there are a lot of timely issues that are coming up now that we need to have with children. But I think there are also other conversations you have with kids from when they're small about staying safe and stranger danger. We start when they're really little, and safety about their bodies. And as you were saying, I think a lot of it is preparation. If there's a conversation that you want to initiate with children, do your research. You're ready for these conversations.
It seems that before, I hate to be this person, but back in my day, you could regulate it more. But now, since we all have these and our kids have these cell phones, it's difficult to push some of these conversations, right? So you need to talk about that same safety and those things. And my young adult daughter said to me just yesterday, every time I go on social media, I get so angry. So I told her, change your algorithm. But what is a better answer here for something like that?
That's a great start. Changing your algorithm. I think a lot of people are really reluctant to take some of the apps off their phone for a while and not just be consistently plugged in. There's a human quality of kind of wanting to see the thing. Like, you get the alert and you want to see it, but turning off those alerts for your social media, or even taking social media off your phone for a while. We have to understand that, you know, when we look at what we call the chrono system, the time system that we're in, a lot of the things we had to talk to children about historically would be kind of once in a while.
Right.
Now it's like, because we have this information cycle happening, they're seeing things over and over, and it feels nonstop. And so we have to deliberately unplug in a way that we haven't had to before. And I think parents modeling that for their children, unplugging and saying, you know, the news cycle is going to be the news cycle. You're not going to miss anything if you shut it down for a few hours, because it's going to go back again to the exact same thing.
Right.
And so we have to really work hard on these strategies of saying, you know what? No phones at the table, no phones at dinner, no phones after 10 p.m., no screens. And you can check everything and have a system, an alarm that says, okay, 2 o'clock, I get to scroll social media for 20 minutes. And after that,
Right.
I'm done.
You know, it's interesting, Meredith, because sometimes, you know, you want to be the cool parent. So you don't want to say, you know, you can't be on the phone, you can't do this. But that's when that parenting sometimes isn't always fun, right? And speaking of that, let's get into some of these topics now that might come up, especially in your practice. Let's talk about when a family is not going to move forward together. Divorce.
Yes.
What are some of the tools that a parent can use? And I guess it would be age-based too, right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
let's just take someone who is in that adolescent stage. They're in middle school and everything is changing around them, and so is home. What is that advice that you give to parents as far as starting the conversation? Hey, mom and dad, mom, dad, and whomever it is, we're not going to be together. How do you even start that conversation?
Yeah, well, I always tell parents, because a lot of times they do come in to see us and let us know they're planning to separate, and they want advice on how to talk to children about it. And, you know, I always say have as much information as you can, because kids really at this stage, they want to know, how does this affect me? Especially at that tween age, because it really is all about them. And so, you know, having your plan, knowing, you know, where is each person going to live? What is the custody situation going to look like? You know, how much, you know, time each is going to be where, but just knowing what to expect,
Right.
I think. And so I don't ever want parents to rush into that conversation. It's like, you need to have some answers between yourselves before you're ready to talk to your kids.
Okay, I'm going to hit you with a big one. We're seeing a lot of division in our society right now. We're seeing a lot of ugliness as far as racism, rear its ugly head now. We have you know, a lot of kids in different situations where maybe their friends suddenly aren't in school anymore, because of where they were born or their parents. How do you start this conversation and still empower your kids, if they're kids of color, or if they're majority kids, to know exactly what's going on?
It's very, very tough right now. Kids are experiencing a world that many of us adults have never experienced.
Absolutely.
The things that they have to navigate and contemplate are so much different than what we had to. And so I live in Los Angeles, and I've worked with several organizations who are helping families create safety plans, meaning that they're having conversations with their children saying, I might not be here when you get home from school.
Wow.
Here's what we're doing, and here's what we're managing. And so one of the things that adults kind of miss is that kids pick up on all this energy, just like Meredith was saying, and we believe that they don't. But they have these questions in their heads, and when we don't fill those questions with the proper narrative, they create a narrative themselves. And so no matter how hard it is for us to have those conversations with them, we have to, because children have a tendency to catastrophize because they don't have the information, they don't have the details. And so when we're talking right now about what's happening with families and what's happening with our immigrant brothers and sisters and what's happening with women and our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, it's a system that we really have to begin being more honest with our children about. And most of us don't have that model. Most of us weren't parented in the way that we're being forced to parent right now. My son is 16, and I remember after the murder of George Floyd, when he was younger, maybe 8 or 9, I wanted to create a video for him to be able to kind of understand, and for other parents to get a model to say, here's a great way to have a conversation with a kid. And as Meredith was saying, it's age appropriate. You don't share details that are unnecessary. You don't share things that are kind of globally hurtful, but you give them the information because they're going to get it. And you want to be the arbiter of that information, how they receive it. But if you haven't done the work yourself, if you haven't had that conversation yourself, it's going to all ooze out of your ears and your nose and your eyes while you're having it with them.
Right.
So it's helpful for parents to practice and to think about, how am I going to say this? How do I feel about this? What parents don't understand is that your dysregulation becomes your child's dysregulation if you don't work on your own breathing and those things while you're having these conversations.
Tough conversations to have. But Mary, let me ask you, we've seen, and I've seen this in my own experience with family and friends, kind of dealing with something right now in this age group. Is like that college age group. So before your kids go off to college, they might experience emotions or more anxiety or a whole bunch of different things when it comes to mental health. What is the conversation to have before? What do parents need to be looking out for? Especially, I think, with our high achievers, right? So now they go and everybody's a high achiever. We're all accepted into this college. We're all what have you, and suddenly you're there and you're at a different level of competition. And sometimes that could result in you needing to take a mental break, right? Or it manifesting itself in a way where you have to take some time away. So what's that conversation? Or should we not have that conversation because it's not every child? What's the guidance there? People are about to get ready to go off to school in the fall, a couple months from now.
Yeah, and I think you're really, their whole lives you're setting this up when you talk about having conversations, having difficult conversations. And a lot of the things we're talking about aren't one and done. You know, these conversations evolve over life and with the age of kids and the more you share with them. And you know, I think going through school as they're getting ready for college with the stress that they have, you know, in this area especially, a lot of overachievers and perfectionists, and you know, trying to help them manage their anxieties and what they're looking for, and manage expectations in college, and letting them know it's always okay. And I think some of that is being approachable as a parent. And you know, whatever they come to you with, you know, don't be shocked, don't be angry, be someone that they can come to, and they will come to. Because when a lot of these big things happen, whether it's drugs at a party or sexual assault, you don't want them to necessarily be going to their friends for this, and that's what they want to do. You want them to come to you. And if you don't have the answers, you can say, look, we'll figure this out. Let's do this together. But you want to be that approachable parent and make sure that they can come to you and you're checking in and you're not afraid to ask about, how's your mood? If they tend to be more anxious or more depressed, don't shy away from these conversations. Have them, ask the questions.
That is so hard if you're away, and you can't have your eyes on kids like you have 0 to 18 or whenever they go away to school. Let me ask you, Donald, about our responsibility as the adults here in the room, right? Because I've said this before on this very show for a different empty nest episode of our show, but my oldest daughter came to me and she said, when I was a kid, you used to say, go run around the block and get your sillies out or whatever. And she was like, that hurt my feelings. And I said, that hurt your feelings because I thought that I did everything right? So when you're, especially in this age group, these young adults or these teenagers come to you and you thought you did something right, but it really affected them a different way. When does the onus go on the parents, switching gears here a little bit, to sort of take responsibility to hear your child, who is an adult probably at this point, to hear what they're saying and to say, you know what, you're right. I did that wrong. How does that look? You
just did it.
Okay.
That was perfect. And I think that sometimes we fail to see our children, whether it's a 6-year-old or a 16-year-old, as kind of this autonomous, being that's consistently getting new information. and we don't see them as that sophisticated. And so I think that when we're working with our children, it is about being honest. It's about talking about things like anxiety and naming them and using the clinical words and the terms for them. Right now, research is showing that some of our children who are going to college, to your earlier point, everybody's the valedictorian. And now they've been told that they're the salt of the earth for their entire lives, and now they're facing this sense of doubt because they're around all these other individuals who are equally as talented. And we find that happening across the lifespan with children and adults. And so I do believe that us parents, we have to begin being a little bit more honest, not just with our children, but with ourselves. A lot of our own vulnerabilities, we're afraid to say in front of our kids. So, starting early on with your, at early adolescence, to say, today was a rough day, and here's what I did about my rough day. Showing them that vulnerability so that it becomes a life tool and not a one-off conversation, as Meredith was saying. But if we model those things for our children consistently, it becomes habitual for them as well. But it only works if we see them as this autonomous, intelligent, across the lifespan from 3 and 4 years old all the way up, but we don't see them that way. And children have been kind of objectified in a way that we don't give them the credit for all of the thoughts that they have, and we kind of shield them in ways we don't need to.
And it occurs to me that is probably, especially on both sides of these things, like these model kids who did everything right, and then so you sort of minimize that they could have any feelings of doubt or what have you. And then on the other side, the kid who maybe cut up in class and was the class clown, but really maybe was a cry for help as far as attention or what have you. So I don't know, it's difficult to look at our kids as like little human beings because we feel like they're our babies always, but that definitely changes, and I would imagine that can be harmful to not look at them as independent human beings with their own sets of emotions.
Absolutely. And I think one thing as parents we have to watch is, often we want certain things for our kids, but we also need to take them from where they are. And they may have, you may be all into sports, but they're into arts.
Right.
And you have to let them become their own person. And, piggybacking off of what we were saying before is, we as parents, we mess up, obviously.
We mess up.
Yes, and
we're only human.
Surprise.
We are. And I've really tried to take ownership of those times. Like I could say, I'll come back and I'm really sorry I yelled earlier. I shouldn't have done that. I was very frustrated with. And to your point about your daughter, that hurt my feelings.
Right.
And all you do is like, thank you for telling me that. I had no idea.
Right.
Because often
because the first response though is, what? You should have seen these other parents out here. But humble yourself.
And take
and
ownership
listen to your kids.
And you're teaching them that it's okay to mess up.
Right.
Yeah.
And then when they mess up, because I feel like a lot of kids we see, they won't take ownership. And a lot of parents these days don't let their kids fail. They're trying to get in there and swoop in. And
well, so to that point though, when do you say, hey kid, now you need to take some responsibility for this? Because we got to say that, don't we?
Yes.
You have to.
Okay.
But you also have to be willing to let your kid fail,
Okay.
fall.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay.
and there are a couple books that sort of on that, the blessings of a skin knee and the blessings of a B+, I think it is, or maybe it's a B-. But it's the idea that it's like we can't have perfection be the goal, because that is what I think is fueling so much anxiety.
So when it comes to how about single parenting, because you spend this time with dad and then you spend this time with the other parent, and you want to be the the cool parent or the one that, so how does that look as far as where we tend to make mistakes? Meredith, I'll ask you.
Yeah, and it's certainly early on in this situation with parents, I think, every parent's trying to control what's happening everywhere. And you have to realize you can only control what's happening in your household.
Okay.
And so you need to have your rules and your expectations of the kids. And, to all those divorced parents, as much as those rules can line up with each parent, that is better for the kid. But at the end of the day, you divorce for a reason. So you focus on your household and try to, have your rules and stick to it, and try not to worry what's happening at the other parent's
Yeah.
house
Right.
because you just can't.
Yeah, you can't. And communicate. I think that co-parents have to really work hard to get past their junk in order to communicate about their now primary goal. The relationship is already dissolved, and our primary goal is to parent this child to adulthood together, but separately. And so, you know, not worrying about what's happening over there is really important, and having a plan such that things are more consistent as much as they can be.
Yeah.
You both talked about trying to foster an open dialogue so that by the time you get to 17 years old
Right.
and, hey, can you come pick me up from this party? I don't like what's going on. You get that phone call versus, you know, trying to work it out. Let me ask you, Donald, about when do we start having these conversations with our kids to sort of, you know, foster that relationship that you hope blossoms?
You start as early as kids have language. As early as
What do we
kids have
say?
language. So when you're, for instance, when you look right now at playgrounds, for instance, across America, when most of us grew up, our parents never apologized to us for anything, and we got hurt
Yeah.
on a playground. The slide was full metal, it
Yeah.
was 200 degrees in the
Yes, it
sun,
was very
we'd skinned our
painful.
knees,
Yes, we
and
did.
now so when we think about how our ecology has changed, we made it such that we're minimizing opportunities for children to build resilience. And so when we're talking about allowing children to fail, we want to have those conversations as early as kindergarten in that, oh, you didn't, you know, do this as well as you thought you did, or you didn't get picked for this team, or you didn't blah, blah, blah. We want to be able to have those conversations, allow those children to hold those real feelings in real time and be reflective on them, starting as early as the earliest challenge that they have. And we want to be honest with them and have this dialogue to model for them, saying, you know what, things don't always go right. But guess what? Tomorrow you get to start all over again. You didn't get the grade that you wanted on that test, and we're so focused, like, you got to get your GPA up. But what about the internal experience that they're having, that we can use this as an opportunity to have an amazing conversation about preparation, about failure, about success, and move it in that direction. So I think parents have to really take all these opportunities. Someone once to me said that the days are long, but the years are short. I understand completely what
again.
parents
It's
are going
so
through.
true.
Yeah, we
Yes.
have a tough road with
Right.
all these things going on, and we're focused on getting to the next day, and that's
Right.
why the day is so short. I mean, the day is so long, but we have to remember in those moments to take a few minutes to be reflective, model that for our kids, sit down and eat together, have conversations. When my son comes home from a party, I ask him, oh, were there drugs or alcohol there? He's like, Dad, there was no cocaine. I'm like, well,
Right.
that's not what I'm asking.
Right.
And we get into a really great conversation about what that looks like, because we all know what our kids are being exposed to,
Right.
but so many of us are so fearful to have the conversation. There was research about suicide. I'm sure Meredith is familiar with this. People thought 20 years ago that if you talk about suicide, you thereby increase someone's chances of engaging in suicidal behaviors. It turned out to be a total myth. That's not true. And so when you talk to your kids, you want to ask them things like hurting themselves if you see that as a thing with them. We don't want to stop. We don't want to be what our parents were. Our parents did a great job.
They did what they could.
They knew what they
Right.
did what they
Right,
could.
right.
And now we have more information to do something differently, but
Right.
we all don't have the bravery to do it.
Okay. When we come back, I want to ask the biggest mistake that you see parents make at different ages, but do need to take a short break. Stick with us here on WUSA 9+. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Well, for the past 20 minutes or so, we've been talking about just different ways to have conversations with your kids, your young adults, adolescents. Meredith, let me ask you, we spoke in the break a little bit about where we should sort of start these conversations. And you had an excellent point about it's kind of awkward to be sitting like this. It gets really serious. But where is a better place perhaps to start to talk about some of these issues that we've discussed?
Yeah, thank you. I think some conversations that feel like scarier, trickier, more uncomfortable, and that could be about sex. It could be about drugs. Sometimes when we're, you're eye to eye with somebody, it's harder to do. And I always say I call it car therapy. You're in the car, they're beside you. You don't have to make eye contact, but you're in a space, you're in a safe space, and you can have these conversations. Or taking a walk with someone where it's not as focused, and it's not looking at you directly. And that can be an easy way to start a conversation that feels like it could be heavier, more uncomfortable for both parents.
For
parent
both,
and parent
right. Yeah,
and
I
the
remember those
child.
conversations. When is it time to call a professional in? When is it time when a parent says, you know what, I'm out of my depth here. I feel like maybe my child needs a little bit more than what I can give. When is that time?
So I think, sometimes when it feels like the kid is struggling and somehow maybe they seem like they're more anxious, they're not managing well, maybe there's lots of breakdowns, they're crying bursts, they're skipping school, maybe they're seeming more depressed, they're not doing, engaged in the things they normally do, and especially if they're not talking to you. And often, kids and teens don't want to talk to the parents, and that's not ideal, but it does happen. And
It's sort of classic.
It is.
Right.
It is.
I'm not going to talk about this, slam the door, and yeah.
Exactly. And I think, if you keep trying the same thing and you feel like you're not connecting with your kid, or you feel like they're getting worse or not feeling better, that's a great time. And often these days, kids ask to speak with someone, which I think is wonderful. I think that stigma that used to be there is not there. And it's wonderful to be that person that a kid will open up to.
I agree. We are moving in that direction.
Yes,
I do
it's
believe
great.
the stigma is lifting a little. Now, let me ask you before we let you go. There are differences, or maybe the different approaches, depending on who we are speaking with. What's the family dynamic here? So, what are some of those differences, and how do we approach? I'm talking about things like gender, sexuality, racism, race. How do we manage?
It's really important. And I think the keynote here is that it's not which conversation you have with which group. Like, white parents have to talk about racism with their children, but it will be a different conversation if you're an immigrant family or a family of color. But everybody needs to have all these conversations. Just because you're a boy dad, it doesn't mean you don't talk about rape culture and toxic masculinity. Some of my friends who have daughters, they have different conversations about when they're going to school. Watch how much you drink, watch what you wear. And a woman shouldn't have to do that. And I see these parents having such a tough time, saying these things. When I talk to my son, he's starting to drive now. I have a different conversation about him being behind the wheel than my white guy friends do.
You got to be honest about it.
You have to be honest. And so I think understanding some of those nuances as it relates to identity and how identity shows up for our children, we have to be ready to go in there and have that conversation. But again, if we haven't done the work, it's very difficult for us to authentically have that conversation. So one of the important things is that we as parents, sometimes we need to go get our own therapy in order to be effective.
A lot of times. Now let's be honest. Okay.
Yes.
A lot of times. So it's just in closing here, and again, I have really enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully you have enjoyed it too. Meredith, let me just give you the last word here. What resources are available to parents right now? Goodness knows we have the internet at our disposal.
It's there.
Is that okay?
It's okay. That's a great starting point. I mean, you can,
There've been plenty of books. You talked about one of them, right?
Yeah, and I think, that's a great place to start. And I think if you need a little more, looking for a therapist, asking your pediatrician for a recommendation. The school counselor can often help. And your friends. You might be surprised at how many of your friends' kids are already seeing somebody.
And you don't have to wait till things get to a tipping point.
Right.
Yeah, let's get in there
You can
early.
just go to see a therapist.
Right.
Like, if you just want to go to therapy for a couple of weeks when things are just kind of smooth, that's okay too.
Right. What's the number one warning sign if a child is in crisis?
Changes. Like Meredith was saying earlier, changes in eating habits, sleeping habits, personality. When you start noticing those, that's when you get keyed in.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I do. And if, maybe they're not going out as more, they're not engaging with friends, grades are dropping, personality seems to be changing. And again, back to difficult conversations, not being afraid to say, is everything okay? Like, I've noticed whatever it is that you're noticing.
Is everything okay? All right. Thank you both. That's our time. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it greatly. I'm hoping that you have gotten as much out of this conversation as I have. I want to thank you for joining us on this special Get Uplifted episode. And if you want more, please watch my Get Uplifted stream right here on WUSA 9 Plus, and you can get your daily dose of good news on Get Uplifted on WUSA 9 mornings. Stay uplifted.